And I have the pleasure to invite Khalid Benhamou from Morocco, who's Managing Director of Sahara Wind, who will present us about the Morocco, his home country, and the other Maghreb states, and also give some information about the Mena region, so the North African region. Khalid, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you see the slides?
Not yet, but I can see you well.
Okay, let me check again why. How come? Okay, partager. Okay, got it. Is it functioning now?
Now we can see, but the connection is not so good.
Okay, can you see the slides?
On the presentation mode, yes. We see all your slides.
Yeah. Yes, I'm trying to. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, super.
Perfect. So I'm going to cover quite a large geographic area. And I wish to start with showing the renewable energy targets that the MENA region has. And obviously the targets are differentiated in time and also in scale. We had two big players, big targets actually. We don't know whether they're going to concretize into big players. Namely, obviously Saudi Arabia, we've got Algeria, which comes up with very large targets, but they start from very limited capacities. So it will be interesting to see how that all will unfold. And so I'm going to go from east to west, starting with Oman, presenting a little bit the targets of Oman, basically 30% of electricity demand by 2030. Equivalent to 2.6 gigawatt, by 2025 at least. And one project is operational since 2019. It consists of a 50 megawatt wind farm. We've got another project that will come online and which will be of a bigger capacity by 2023. So if we go to Saudi Arabia, we really have a country with huge wind potential, fairly good quality wind. The big unknown will obviously be whether its ambitious renewable energy target will be met, knowing the COVID measures, obviously the implementation of those projects. On the ground, the first large-scale wind project, the Dumat al-Jandal wind project, which is in construction, has been quite spectacular because we had the levelized energy cost of 2.1 cents, essentially, which was a record low price, at least at that time. There is the Median wind farm project, which obviously will be implemented of a similar scale at a latter stage. And again, the future will let us know whether Saudi Arabia will become the main, will be able to tap, essentially the largest share of the Middle East wind capacity additions by 2020. Interestingly enough, in this map, we have obviously the wind resources of Saudi Arabia and Egypt are essentially tapping on a corridor on the Red Sea. And so it's interesting to note in that context that both countries will be linked by a 3 gigawatt HVDC line, which will enable both power sectors to balance their wind loads and renewable energy loads. And if we look at Egypt, we really have the Middle East, North Africa's largest operating wind capacity, with a variety of projects having been implemented. And obviously, some being built, but a pipeline that is quite big for the coming year. By 2023, in fact, it is expected that these capacity will come online. And as you can see, we're talking about almost a 4 gigawatt pipeline of projects under development. Some of them are under construction. So it would be interesting to see what will really be implemented in that country by that deadline. So again, these figures have been provided by Professor Galal Osman, and I thank him very much for his input on that part of the world. I'm going to continue with the Jordan operational wind capacity. Jordan, about 0.5 gigawatt of capacity, and obviously a focus on governance and financing scheme to meet its targets, which has been doubled to 20% in 2018. So there is a strong government push to try to increase the share of renewables with both PV and wind. If we look at the capacities in Tunisia, we obviously have a milder picture. Obviously, Tunisia has implemented these projects a while ago, wind projects. Some of them have actually maintenance issues as well. And the government, which has set very ambitious targets for 2023, for 2030 in 3 phases, 2020, 21, 25. So obviously the challenge will be to know whether they're going to meet these targets. And we know that it's going to be a mix between public and private wind farms. We know that there is a 300 megawatt public wind tender that will come on public lands, and 200 megawatt coming up on we don't know how many sites from the private sector. So as I had mentioned earlier, Algeria is an interesting case study because of the very limited wind capacity that has been installed to date, but the extremely ambitious renewable energy agenda, at least mostly focused on photovoltaic. 62% of the 22 gigawatts are expected to be photovoltaic. And the next renewable energy technology that Algeria is envisioning is wind, with 23% of that capacity, equivalent to 5 gigawatts. So it will be interesting to see how that will unfold in the coming years, knowing that the coronavirus obviously will have also an impact on the income of both Saudi Arabia and Algeria, fossil fuel incomes. And so it will be interesting to see how the oil markets will fetch in that regard. In the case of Algeria, there is obviously also political issues that need to be considered to know whether the current government is keen on investing in renewables. That is likely to be a scenario. And if we look at Morocco's wind market, we are obviously dealing with also a mature market like the Egyptian market. The difference here is the various different frameworks that have been implemented, both public-private partnership and renewable energy consumption law, which enables industrial loads to get renewable energy from a private operator using the grid as a platform to wheel the power from generating sites to consumption sites. So basically, what we have noticed in this market is a lot is being under construction as we speak, with the integrated wind energy program of 850 megawatt, composed of 5 wind sites that are being built from now until 2022. Interesting case study also with using the wind technology in one of the wind farm is using basically used wind turbines from Finland and crowdfunding. This has happened in the Walidia wind farm, which is going to be built later on. Everything has been delivered on site. And so basically Morocco is obviously going to double at least its capacity by 2022 at least, for a 2.6 gigawatt capacity. What is interesting here to note is that this capacity can be exceeded. However, Morocco is confronted to grid transfer challenges, namely the majority of that wind capacity is operational in the south on the Sahara coastline, and the load centers are located in the north. So there are 2 possibilities to overcome this, and I will introduce you to these possibilities into 2 next slides. I just want to real quickly talk about the local contents and the manufacturing and the consolidation of the wind industry in Morocco. Obviously, the local contents will go from 50% to 70% in the near future. We have the blade factory that has been operational for the last 2 years, and basically 80% dedicated for exports. It's a Siemens blade factory with locally rolled towers. So the consolidation of wind industry has enabled a transfer of that industry to the region. And I'm going to present a little bit the case of Mauritania, where you have actually a very large wind farm compared to the scale of the Mauritanian grid, which is very small, and is confronted to wind integration issues because the global capacity of Mauritania does not exceed 1 gigawatt. And so it will be challenging for that country to add wind capacities unless you integrate grid expansions, which Mauritania is carrying out with its neighboring countries, Senegal and Mali, but also Morocco. And obviously the next 2 slides will be dedicated to the Power-X, the first Power-to-X applications that are likely to take place in the region. You can see here the trade wind-blown area of Morocco and Mauritania, with the Sahara in the middle as well. And you do have the loads right now, which are focused on desalination stations. So you also have interesting application where you have wind for desalination, for agriculture as well. So climate resilient agriculture, if you wish, desert, and destined to export markets of agricultural cash crops. So it's a sustainable model. But what is most interesting is because of the trade winds, Morocco disposes of 72% of the world phosphate reserves, which is a key fertilizer. And to produce fertilizer, 90% of the phosphates are transformed into fertilizers. You need ammonia. And so Morocco has 20% of the world fertilizer export market. It's a big ammonia importer, and that is likely to be transformed locally into wind. Wind is going to be used for the electrolysis and to produce green ammonia. So that's a very interesting trend. And discussions are ongoing with the European Commission for the first pilot projects. We're talking about 100 megawatt projects to start with, so it's fairly large. And similar applications will happen in Mauritania. Again, I've shown you here HVDC transfer infrastructure that is likely to take place before 2030, obviously, and to see how Morocco is going to integrate more wind energy from that region. And basically, the technology is essentially to produce ammonia, to transform the phosphate also into fertilizer using the same technology. And that will enable HVDC line to power North African and perhaps also enable exchanges with European markets. And similarly, Mauritania, whose main exports is iron ore, can transform its iron ore into CO2 emission-free steel. And that's scalable. Both technologies are scalable, so they're accessible. You do not need to have a very large capacity to break even. So those are the promising trends. Again, Power-to-X scenarios that are likely to be supported by both governments and the European Commission. And I think with that, I'll conclude my presentation, and I'm of course open to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Khalid. I think that was a really great overview of our big region you spoke about, and I found it in particular interesting, your last comments, which are really kind of long-term visions, which are not so much affected by short-term considerations. The industrial use of the renewable power, what you said, is certainly something that we've just started in the world to look into. So that's an interesting one. I have one question here for you from Jami Hussain. That is certainly an interesting one. Energy can be generated in Sahara for Europe. Any progress in this direction?
Well, again, first of all, the issue here is to look at the grid capacity, and the utility is essentially stuck with the transfer of wind capacity from the Sahara coastline to the load centers of Morocco. So at some point, grid will have to be addressed to be able to meet those 5 gigawatts of auctions. There are other sites in northern Morocco which can be obviously implemented as well. And also what is interesting is to note that within this target, there is obviously going to be a lot of private projects dealing with supplying either load centers, industrial load centers, and as well as cities. So that is also being discussed currently in the framework. So I do not believe these 5 gigawatts are going to be auctioned at once. They are likely to be diffused in different projects. And I also believe that this target for 2030 is probably going to be exceeded once the issue of grid transfer, just like in Germany, would have been solved between the south and the north.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is a very realistic answer to this. Yeah, thank you. You answered both questions.